on with the class, and we're skipping over a little bit of the relationship part, and we're going to get to the essential part of the molecular relationship. And part of this will be a review, and as we go into how the molecular relationship actually works and governs. Because the principle in the molecular relationship, the principles involved will be principles that will eventually govern the world. And they're an interesting set of principles. So anyway, let's start from the beginning.
Is that chapter 20?
Yeah, In the beginning, the consciousness of God began with the very small. It began with the building blocks that's much smaller than the atoms themselves, and even the protons and the nucleus of the atom, even smaller than that. And scientists call this the Big Bang. They say in the first part of the Big Bang, and in like a millionth of a second, about a tremendous amount of stuff happened. And in this, they are correct, because when the consciousness of God began creation, time was on a totally different level. So that, say, one 1 second passing on the atomic level is equal to like millions of years on our level. So instead of everything happening in less than a second at the beginning of creation, it was really like billions of years as far as consciousness goes. And so in the beginning, on creating on the smallest level, because the building blocks had to be created before we could be created. So the building blocks, and this is what really puzzles the scientists as they look at the smaller and smaller. For instance, when the theory of evolution was first presented, they thought that the building blocks were cells, but they were just like blobs. They didn't think there was any DNA or anything in there. They just thought that a cell was like just a blob of protoplasm or something. And they thought that was like the building blocks. And then they look smaller and smaller, and they find out the cells are more complicated than the entire city of New York. They've got all kinds of things going on in there. And then they have these 2 strands of DNA, which are like tremendous computers. And then there's other strands that are not in use right now, so they think. And so there's the complexity there is just boggles the mind. And some scientists are so impressed with the technology in a cell that they've been converted to believing there is some divine creator. They don't know what that is, but they think there's some higher intelligence. Others aren't convinced no matter what. It wouldn't matter how complicated the cell is. They refuse to acknowledge higher intelligence. So then as we go smaller, we've learned that there's the atom is in perfect balance. And scientists still do not understand, how is it that the electrons circulating the atom are in perfect opposite charge to the nucleus? How is that perfection achieved? And scientists are baffled by that. And how did the motion get started? So that we have all these atomic particles in motion. And no, people do not know, scientists just are baffled by that, how that happens. And so this is uh, how it happened was that the intelligence of God spent um, millions, perhaps billions of years, as far as we would think of time, in perfecting these atomic worlds, and perfecting the atom, and perfecting the cells, and perfecting all these things on the smaller level. And on the smaller level, the molecular relationship is in play. And because it's in play, the little tiny lives there have achieved perfection. And I always use the word relative perfection because it's as close to perfection as can be achieved. Ultimate perfection doesn't exist anywhere. But it's relative perfection, meaning it's as perfect as it can be and still have physical form. And so for instance, the hydrogen atom, which is the foundation of the building block of the entire universe, because when stars are created, we have a gathering of hydrogen atoms. They gather until the source becomes so condensed, or the center becomes so condensed, it produces nuclear fusion, and then it creates the heavier elements. And then you have the star turning into a supernova, which creates such pressure that it builds the heavier elements. And the heavier elements will then gather together and produce another generation of stars with heavier elements in it. And our solar system is a second generation uh, star. The first generation stars live some of them only live a few million years. Our sun is over 4 billion years old, and it's expected to live to be about 10 billion years. But a lot of stars just live a few million years, or maybe a billion years, and then they'll explode and regather together. And so um, the molecular relationship exists up to the cellular level, and up to the, well, you might say your body is on the molecular relationship because the various organs of your body cooperate together. The heart and the brain just don't think of themselves. And this is where we're kind of off the molecular relationship of the lower lives. The lower lives have learned to be interdependent. They just aren't out for themselves, but they function as a part of the whole. And this we see in the body. The body as a whole is functions on the molecular relationship. The heart pumps blood not just for itself, but for the whole body. Because if it keeps the whole body alive, it stays alive. It understands that. And human beings don't understand that. The same with the brain. The brain just doesn't think for the brain itself. It thinks for the heart and the feet and the liver and everything else. It sends these signals for the whole body, not just for itself. And so the molecular relationship extends to the cells and to the organs of our bodies and to the bodies themselves. So the body is the highest representative of the molecular relationship that is available for us to see physically. And so we're off of it because the average person thinks of only what benefits himself. He doesn't think enough about what's beneficial for the group. And we see this with our political division today. It's tremendous division where the left just wants everything for the left's benefit only, and the right wants everything for the right's benefit only. And so we have this political divisions where we have two sides, and each side is seeking just what they want for their benefit, and heck with other side. And so we're way off the molecular relationship as humanity because we're divided and we're not looking for the good of the whole. Now, each side thinks they got the best for the good of the whole, but they're so polarized that both sides are missing the concept of the molecular relationship, where the ideal is found in the way our body functions itself, is that our life in our body extends throughout our entire body. If you pinch yourself somewhere, your whole body is aware that there's a little pain there, and wants to make sure that that pain is alleviated. So if you have a bad pain, if you burn yourself, your whole body is centered, functions in such a way that you're centered on relieving that pain from the burn or whatever. So when anything happens negative to the body, the whole body is prepared to do what is necessary to take care of the problem. And this is what humanity is just dense on. We're very dense on this idea of taking care of the problem as a whole rather than in a way that just benefits us as an individual. Okay, any comment on that before we move on?
So you're saying then that evolution goes from the atoms themselves into molecules, into cells, into organs, into bodies, and now we've achieved the highest level of perfection as we can as individuals. So the next step is to bring people together into a human molecule where we learn to share equally our time, talents, energies, resources as a group. You're saying that's the next step in cosmic evolution?
Pretty much. Now, the next step has been taken by a handful of individuals, and they are members of the kingdom of God. And these people, we call masters, are in a molecular order. In other words, these are individuals that have looked beyond the personal ego, and they look for the good of the whole. And each member of the kingdom of God has a group consciousness where they tune in to other people in the group in such a way that they see themselves as one life, like a body, so that they participate. They're not. We don't have like Jesus on one side and Buddha on the others, and they're in a competition to see which one can get more people on their side. That's not the way they think. That's the way humanity thinks. But there are a handful of beings that belong to this planet that are on the molecular relationship and figuring all the entities in the higher worlds. There's innumerable number, but we as humanity on this physical plane have missed out. We aren't there yet. And so this is where humanity has to go. And just like it took a lot of time as time was measured there, because time is measured by motion and consciousness. And so time can be completely altered as we go from one plane to another. So when the consciousness of God was in the microcosmic world, it actually spent time as we might see it, like millions of years perfecting the atom. So they probably had a lot of failures producing a hydrogen atom before they got one that finally worked. And this is what baffles, like I say, it baffles scientists how this just happened by accident. Well, it wasn't by accident. It happened a lot of trial and error before they got a hydrogen atom that worked. And when they got one that worked, then trillions and trillions of them were duplicated, and on the same principles. Once you get one thing that works, just like a computer program, they get a computer program that they do a lot of trial and error, do a lot of things that don't work and finally get it together so they get the bugs out of it, and then everybody can duplicate it and start using it. It doesn't take any intelligence to duplicate it. So we have within our bodies all kinds of tiny lives that are on automatic pilot, like little computer programs that's in us that was built by high intelligence. And it functions on the molecular order where everything is geared to cooperate in producing a greater whole that works. And so you have trillions of little lives in you that's functioning on the molecular order. But because they've reached relative perfection, their consciousness shifts up higher and merges to produce a higher consciousness. And you are the product of a merging of trillions of tiny lives, which is kind of interesting. So now the next step up is for us to create a molecule where we will merge and draw down a higher life to incarnate in the molecule itself. So that's a really interesting thing to contemplate, that we will actually be a means of creating a higher life form. And so, oh, speaking of that, it was interesting. Did you see the post I made? I was reading this book called The Power of the Magdalene. There's been several people that have taken people back to the days of Jesus by regression. And now some memories are false memories, but if you get a person really under correctly, some of them, if you can test them and develop powerful evidence, they did go back. Now, this particular person, she took, this guy was an Essene, and he come up with all kinds of data, and they actually researched it out, and everything he told them that they could verify turned out to be true, historically true, and he didn't know anything about that. But he talked about uh, that's the first evidence I've seen of Jesus having a molecule like we've taught. He said that the main molecule, he didn't call it a molecule, but he said the main organization was 12 male disciples and 12 female disciples. First time I've seen anyone else say that, but this this person uh, by regression revealed this, but he said there was six of them. He said altogether, Jesus organized six of them, making 144, making, I think we call that a master molecule in the book, if I remember right. But so they had 144 altogether. So they had six full molecules created according to this regression. And Jesus worked with them, but the main molecule we know about are the 12 uh, apostles representing the 24. So anyway, I found that quite interesting, and it was the first actual evidence I found of the, the molecule of 24 being uh, uh, accurate historically. Okay, so we've life has progressed on the molecular order until humanity, and there's a handful of humanity that is in the molecular order, and it's called the kingdom of heaven, the fifth kingdom upon this earth. They are in the molecular order, but it hasn't been established among mortal physical humanity yet. And so this is what has to be done. And Jesus did this in his day, but after he left the scene, everything fell apart and the knowledge of it was lost. And several people have tried to bring it back, and have not been successful. But it's just a matter of time before it is established. And so this is what um, we will seek to do, is to create the molecular order. And so the first thing in understanding it is that there's life on all levels. There's life on the subatomic level, and there's life on higher levels. And a lot of people think the higher lives are uh, above human, like planetary and solar. Now we have higher human existences that are participating in this, but they're like the operating on the soul level, like the Senat Kimura, the Ancient of Days. He represents the logos of the planet, but he is not, all there is to the logos. He merely tunes in from the higher life of the planet to the lower life. And the lower life is like the personality of the planet, and it's not that highly evolved yet. And the higher lives are on the molecular order, but they're not even in the physical. But Sanat Kimura would be like the bridge between the two. And just like Christ himself is the bridge between humanity and the Ancient of Days and the, the higher spiritual realities. So we have this um, interesting place we're in is the higher you get up in the universe, the less evolved they are on their own plane. But when they reach the end of their evolution, their evolution will be greater than the lower. So even though like we are not as evolved, humanity is not evolved on our plane as the cells in our body are on their plane, or as the atoms are on their plane. But a cell evolves to a greater complexity and potential than an atom. And a physical body as a whole achieves more complexity and potential than a cell. And humanity as a whole uh, has evolved to a lesser degree on its plane, but it has more potential when it reaches the end of evolution than any of the lesser lives that are on the molecular principle. And then when eventually the planets and star systems evolve to where they are molecular, then they will reach a higher complexity in the universe itself than we will reach. And we will join them in consciousness. And so this is an interesting thing to contemplate, that we are not as evolved on our plane as the cells in your body are evolved on their plane. They have reached relative perfection. When we reach relative perfection, we will be as gods compared to what we are now. So think of that. And there are a handful that have reached this state, and they have appeared to humanity, and they have been called gods in the past because they seem to have potential way beyond what we can do. But what any life can do, we can do when we reach the end of our evolution. So it's interesting to contemplate that when humanity achieves molecular consciousness, they will no longer be just regular humanity. And this is illustrated, I've used this many times, in the atoms. You have different atoms join together to create molecules. And when they join together to create molecules, the molecule is totally different than the individual atoms that compose them. It's really interesting to contemplate how this happens. And the simplest, most common molecules out of water, you have two hydrogen atoms joining with one oxygen atom. And hydrogen and oxygen, when they're separate, and they can be used as rocket fuel. What produced the rocket fuel that sent men to the moon was liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen combining together and igniting, and it produced the thrust that sent our men to the moon. Yet look at the difference that happens when hydrogen combines with oxygen in a molecular relationship. They don't explode anymore. Instead of exploding, they produce one of the most stable substances in the universe that we call what?
Water.
Water. It's just as stable as substance as you can get. Whereas when they're separate, they're very unstable. And like say, you put them together and light a match, it'll just blow up. But and they make good, excellent rocket fuel. But put them together, it produces, they're totally different. And so this is what Jesus did. He found 12 molecular units, put them together, and instead of just being just regular ragtag ordinary humans, they turned into something different than human. So the basic building block of the human molecule is the male and female energies together, because what produces a molecular relationship? A molecular relationship cannot be produced if everything is out of balance. In other words, you take hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen lacks a an electron in its outer shell, and so hydrogen alone is a little out of balance, and oxygen is also out of balance. So what happens is the hydrogen and oxygen share their electrons in such a way that they're in balance. But separately, they're out of balance. That's why they'll both explode when you light a match putting them together. But by sharing and balancing their energy so they're not out of balance, they become stable and they're able to join and produce something greater than themselves. And so each of us are in either a male or female body, and we're all out of balance to a degree when we're alone. Like old Curtis over here, he's got a big excess of male energy. I mean, he just, male energy is ascending energy, and he just loves to send.
I need 10 women to balance me.
Maybe that's why they had polygamy in the old days. Huh? But so on the other hand, we may have some females here feel they need 10 guys to balance them. Who knows? So, but anyway, if you're in a female body, then you're out of balance in the other way. Now, like I say, we go through cycles, and I've geared them from like 1 to 10. So each person in each life is from a 1 to 10 on the male side, or 1 to 10 on the female side. Once the people that are close to 0 are the ones that turn out to be gay, where they're not attracted to the opposite, they're opposite very much. Okay, they might have a slight attraction, but not enough to want to have a permanent relationship with them. So then you have others that are highly attracted to the opposite sex. These are people with just a higher charge. And so we each have a little bit different charge. And so to create the molecular relationship, we have to have a group of 24 where the charge of the 12 females balances off the charge of the 12 males. And this takes us close to the 0 point. We have to get close to the 0 point. And this is what water does. What happens with water when hydrogen, two atoms of hydrogen combines with one atom of oxygen, it brings them very close to the 0 point. We never get completely there, because if hydrogen and oxygen were perfectly balanced, it would disappear. It would just return to spirit. But hydrogen and oxygen are close enough to balance. They produce a stable substance, which we call water. And so we will not achieve perfect balance. If we did, well, we would just return to spirit. But what happens when we get close to that perfect balance? Then we feel a charge of spirit coming through us, creating the opportunity of birthing an actual new life form. And creating this new life will have a higher consciousness that we can share with it. So what happens in the kingdom of God, and this is what happens among the masters, is they just do not depend on their individual consciousness, but their consciousness is joined in such a way that they can tap into each other's minds and consciousness as a whole, and draw from it whatever they need. Now, what's interesting about this, and people are always worried about losing their individuality, but hydrogen and oxygen, when they're in water, when they produce water, they still are hydrogen and oxygen. But they join together in such a way they don't identify, the hydrogen atom in water doesn't think anymore, I am hydrogen. It doesn't think that way anymore. Now it thinks, I am water. But I could be hydrogen if I wanted to be. But water is more desirable to be now. So that's the way I'm identifying. And this is the way we will be when we enter into the kingdom of God and share a higher group consciousness. Curtis here will still feel like, well, I can be Curtis whenever I want, but I like being this higher consciousness. I want to identify with this more. And so we identify with the higher. Curtis identifies with the higher. Annie identifies with it. Rulina identifies with it. And so we lose sight of ourselves to identify with a higher, but we lose nothing.
That's because we acquire properties above and beyond those of average mortal man. You know, like what the 12 apostles could do. They could heal the sick, walk on water. They were alchemists. They had properties that were more divine. So, as a group, we would each have those properties. We'd retain our individuality, but yet become more than we are now, and that's something that people don't understand. So they haven't consciously had a desire to take that next step, and they won't until they see it demonstrated. And until we demonstrate what those properties are, it'll be a mystery.
Yeah.
Humanity.
And we're going to have molecular scientists in the far future. We're trying to create a molecule 24, but look at the molecular world. There's thousands of different molecules. And so when the molecular order begins to take shape, we're going to have molecular scientists manifest saying, well, let's create some complex molecules to see what kind of properties that can be manifested. So there might be molecules of, well, there'll be molecules of 7, 12,
70s.
19, 20, 70s, whatever. There'll be all kinds of experimental molecules created, but the base molecule that we're working on is the 12 units or 24, composed of 24 entities.
Well, the base molecules are triads. Getting people to work in groups of three is challenging enough.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the triad wouldn't really be a molecule. It's an ingredient in a molecule. A little bit like an atom. We have atoms created by quarks. A number of quarks produce a proton. So uh, I think a triad would be kind of a little bit of corresponding to a quark.
It was more like water. Water,
Yeah.
you've got your
Yeah, water
three
is a very simple one.
very simple molecule,
You know,
but
it's three, and so yeah, a triad is three. So yeah, it's
it's the base component to your
right.
group of 12 is triad.
But there's an important thing to remember as we have the statement as above, so below, and as below, so above. But a lot of people think there's an exact correspondence, but there's not. There's always a rough correspondence because the mind of God is creative. And he just doesn't think, well, I'm going to create on the higher level exactly what I did on the lower. Well, what fun is that? He wants to create something entirely new and better. So when the mind of God creates on a higher level, it's similar to the lower. There's correspondences, but it's different. So this is one thing that DK teaches. He says to use the law of correspondences correctly requires the intuition. So seeing how things work on a lower level gives you the basic principles. And then to see how it corresponds on a higher level, you have to use your intuition to see how that's going to play out because it won't be exactly the same. A solar system is a little bit like an atom, but it's not exactly like an atom. So if you want to understand how the uh, compare one with the other, it's going to take a little bit of intuition and thinking to figure out the differences and the similarities. So it's interesting to contemplate.
Well, I might just add to that where uh, hydrogen and oxygen learn to share. They share an electron. People have different things to share. Like, how can we blend and bond and combine by sharing? What does Stacy have that I don't have? What does Ken have that I don't have? What do I have that Adam doesn't have? So, in building our relationships, we need to see where we can share and on what levels, emotionally, mentally, ideas, physical things. Ed has a dump truck, you know.
Let's use that dump truck, Ed.
I'll be right over.
In it.
Well, yeah, on a higher level, say a master would look down on us. We see this in like little pieces, but we don't think of it as energy. But on a higher level, when we share different things and our talents and uh, our words and our thoughts with each other, it's really an exchange of energy, just like the little atoms have an exchange of energy when they create something greater than themselves. And we don't really look at it this way, but on a higher level, we whatever we do is really an exchange of energy. And that exchange of energy is always on a soul level, something that's trying to achieve greater balance. What produces physical form is being slightly out of balance. If everything was in balance in the universe would disappear. But God had to throw everything a little bit out of balance to make the universe. And so to have the universe reach the end of its evolution, all the little lives are trying to achieve balance. Everything is trying to achieve balance. You can see this in the microcosmic world, how balance is the key to the existence of everything. And we as human beings, everybody feels just a little bit out of balance. Some people feel way out of balance, and do really crazy stuff because they're so out of balance, it just drives them crazy. And other people just feel a little out of balance. And then think of different ways people feel out of balance. Like a lot of people feel like, well, I need my other half. I wish I could find my one and only, and then I'd just feel a lot happier. In other words, what they're really thinking is just by myself, I feel just a little out of balance. It'd be nice if I had, opposite polarity to balance myself off. And so everybody feels this need, and this draws us all into relationship. And let's say you find a mate that makes you feel more in balance, but you still will not be in perfect balance. So you and your mate, you find some other people that are friends, and this makes you feel a little bit more in balance when you visit your friends. You just feel more comfortable, more in balance, but you're still not in perfect balance. And so this is the driving force of the creation of the universe, is the driving force for balance. Some have a strong driving force. Those with a strong driving force have an energy that's out of balance, and there's the driving force to seek balance. Now, this hasn't the being in or out of balance has nothing to do with your state of evolution. Sometimes when I've taught this, people think, well, uh, I'm highly evolved, so I'm not. I shouldn't be out of balance. Well, not necessarily. Some Because we all go through the cycles in our various lives. You'll go through a, a, a life where you're close to the 0 point, and then other lives where you're far away from the 0 point. But when you're far away from the 0 point, you have the advantage of being driven. You're driven to seek and to build and to find that balance. So this is a driving force. And other times, as you reach closer to the 0 point in different lives, then you have other advantages. You don't have as much distraction pushing you to balance, and it gives you a little bit more focus on the center. And so there's advantages both ways. So as you go through your series of lives from a 1 to a 10 on the negative and 1 to a 10 on the positive, you seek balance in different ways, and you're driven in different ways. And so if we have like 12 females and 12 males, overall, the two merging, the two groups of energies merging together will come pretty close to the 0 point by the law of averages. Okay, any comments or questions on that before we move on here?
Well, in
When an
college,
electron shell is filled, it becomes a noble element. It's
in
called
college,
noble.
in college chemistry, we're told that even the electrons go in pairs. So they're clouds of energy, one spinning one way and one spinning the other way. So electrons themselves are in pairs.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ed. And I had an argument one time with a guy with a doctor's degree in physics, and he thought he was really smart. And he disagreed with me that I told him neutrons aren't entirely neutral. And gold, which is science say is the atoms are neutral. I said they aren't neutral either. And he argued with me about that. And so I did a little Googling, and I found that they, using sophisticated technology, it's a new type of microscope they developed. They actually had a photograph of gold atoms. And when they photographed these gold atoms, on this one atom was fluctuating from one gold atom to another. It just was moving back and forth. And so I showed him this picture, and I says, look, obviously these little gold atoms are not entirely neutral, because this little gold atom is going back and forth between one to another. I said, if it was entirely neutral, it wouldn't be moving back and forth. And he just told me I didn't know what I was talking about and refused to talk to me anymore. but he was, I think I embarrassed him because he had a PhD in physics and he thought he was a lot smarter than me. But he
It sounds like Warren Lee.
yeah, he couldn't explain why that little gold atom was moving back and forth if it was entirely neutral. So and that's one of the core teachings that I presented is there's no such thing as long as there's physical form of any kind. There's not perfect neutrality. You can get close. The neutron is very close to being 100% neutral, but even it is not 100%. If it was 100% neutral, it'd go back to spirit. And but when we reach that close to that 0 point as a molecular group, we can draw in the power of spirit, and spirit and matter can then have a strong interplay that can produce tremendous change. Okay, that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Any questions or comments before we end?
I just want to say Happy New Year to everybody.
Oh yeah, no, we won't see you till what, next year now?
What?
We won't see you guys till next year now. Wow.
Oh, actually,
It's a
no.
long way away.
Here's to the last meeting of the year.
Oh, by the way, it's Artie's birthday on Tuesday, so everybody wish her a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Artie.
Happy birthday, Artie. Love you.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Artie.
Thank
Hello, Artie.
Thank you, Curdy. I'm looking forward to your present, Curdy.
It's coming your way, Artie.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think he's going to
Always
give
send
you
her
a
something.
big kiss on the cheek there, Artie, probably.
No, he's gonna send me something.
Oh, is he? Yeah, these women, they expect a lot from us guys, don't they? Presents, and she might even expect some flowers or something, who knows? Okay.
And she's only going to get money from me.
We're going to go crazy and go out to dinner tomorrow night. We're going to risk getting the virus, so.
Wear a mask. Wear a mask.
Got to take a little risk in this world. Okay, any other comments or questions before we wrap it up?
Thank you.
Everything in life is a formula of energy, force, and substance.
That's certainly true. Well, you made a good point, Ed, and the fact that, DK gives out what he calls formulas, a number of them. So that's interesting to contemplate the correspondences to that word. Okay, you've been a good group today, good vibes. I feel good vibes with the group here as a whole. And so we'll look forward to seeing you next year, next Sunday at 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, all being well.
Thank you, JJ. Thanks,
Thank
JJ.
Have a great week, everybody.
A great Happy New Year to everybody.